decay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd have to look it up. I could. I guess I believe Wikipedia.
Well, but the interesting thing is because it's beta, I mean, it does do beta, but it can either be calcium or argon.
Oh, I see. Oh, so there's a branching.
Yeah.
I specialize to get a PhD, so most subfields are out of my range. I guess I have the escape clause. But that doesn't keep me from
I think
being
it's
a
probably a
klutz.
good time to start.
Yeah, Mike, are you able to take it, or shall I?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead? I am having issues, so it would be good if you did it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have Dr. John Stolz with us. He's going to be talking about radiation, and he is the Dr. Stolz studies microbial metabolism in metals and metalloids, microbial communities, and hypersaline environments and water quality. He's published 95 peer-reviewed articles, 37 book chapters, and authored and edited 2 books. He's currently co-authoring, editing a book on the environmental impacts of unconventional oil and gas reserves development for Cambridge University Press. But recently, Dr. Stolz has been looking at sanitary landfills in Pennsylvania and New York that have been allowed to take both solid and liquid waste from oil and gas operations. The leachate is now contaminated with toxins and radioactivity, and he's going to talk about us tonight, about that with us tonight. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Stolz.
Thank you, Diane. I hope you all can hear me. And I'm looking to see if there's a way if people want to ask questions, or we just want to wait till the end to ask questions. I'm going to try not to be too technical. But again, you know.
What do you prefer, John? Would you like to take the questions as they pop up, or at the end? We typically take them at the end, but it's your preference.
All right. Well, I think if something is that I say that at a particular time, like for instance, talking about the radioactivity, if they want to, you know, ask a question, I wouldn't mind it. But they can wait till the end too if they want.
Okay. Anybody who has a question for Dr. Stolz, please put it in the chat, and we'll see if we can put it off to the end, or if you need to, if it's pertinent.
All right.
He's currently speaking about.
Thanks. So again, thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this. I'm not the only one who's been making a noise about this recently, and you'll see some of those folks later. But, you know, it seems to be that, you know, since drilling came back to Pennsylvania in the form of the Marcellus shale development, the industry and, of course, our wonderful Department of Environmental Protection have been trying to figure out ways to get rid of their waste. And that was something that I've always been interested in, not because I'm into waste, but again, as mentioned in the introduction, I do a lot with extreme environments, and especially microorganisms living in salty environments. And one of the most remarkable things that I've realized was that, you know, the brine, as they call it, or this produced water that comes out of these wells, is very much like some of the extreme systems that I work on. But more importantly, early on, it became obvious to me that some way or shape or form, it was getting into our drinking water. And a good friend and colleague, Bob Donnan, liked to say, you know, he got involved because of chunky water. And back in 2009, the DEP had a hearing up in Cranberry because they were proposing new regulations and limits on discharge from publicly owned drinking water, publicly owned wastewater facilities. And again, it was very clear that the industry didn't want these regulations to go in because they needed a place to dump their wastewater. And so this kind of summarizes everything, and you can go and have a drink now. But just basically the premise that I was working on was this waste getting from the well pad into our drinking water. And how would I be able to make that connection? So, okay, let's see. Okay, wake up here, computer. There we go. All right. So most recently, there was this article, and I was in it, but by Justin Noble in the Rolling Stone magazine. And it was America's, radiation. It was our big secret. Oil and gas produces nearly 1 trillion gallons of toxic waste a year. And the fact is that a lot of this waste is radioactive. Now, the problem with radioactivity is that not everybody knows about it. You've probably seen the science fiction movies from the 50s and the 60s. But the point is that, people really don't know that much about it. And also the fact that it's colorless, odorless, and tasteless. So, you could be exposed to dangerous levels of radiation and really not know it. So in this particular case, this is actually an injection well facility in Ohio. And I was fortunate enough, as I often am, I get a phone call. Someone says, would you like some samples? And I say, okay, that would be nice. Well, these are a set of samples that I got from a trucker who's been hauling not just Marcellus, but Utica shale wastes all over Ohio. And he was concerned because some of his friends, they're having some health issues. And he had heard about that there might be some radioactivity and it may be toxic. And so he gave me these samples. And if you look at some of them there, and let me see if I can get my can you see my pointer there? Okay. So this is basically, and I have to give a shout out to my colleague, Dan Bain. This work was done in Dan's lab. He's set up to do the 21-day ingrowth experiment. But basically, we got a good estimate of the amount of radium-226 and 228, both of which are radioactive and decay. But just for reference, in drinking water, the limit that the EPA sets is 4 picocuries per liter. Now, for point of reference as well, there's 3.8 liters in a gallon. So there's almost 4 times, the amount in a gallon than there would be in a liter. So here we're looking at, this particular sample had almost 3,200 picocuries. This one here is the combination. If you add the radium-226 to the radium-228, we're talking over 8,000 picocuries, and that's per liter. And so you multiply that by 3.8, then you multiply that by 4,500 gallons, which is your typical tanker. That's a lot of radiation, but guess what? This is brine, this is residual waste, and these trucks are not placarded. So there's an issue, and so that's one of the things that we're trying to address. But this is not a new thing. This is an article that I found from December of 1990, and I'll pick out a couple of things for you. They were looking at oil fields down in Louisiana. So test wells, okay, contain radiation levels 5 to 30 times higher than the government allows to be released from nuclear power plants. In contrast to the heavy regulated nuclear power industry, where emissions are strictly controlled and workers heavily protected, radiation in the oil industry has been wholly uncontrolled. Okay, then you get this other here. One study showed that 99% of all oil equipment tested across the country produced less than 2 millirem per hour of gamma radiation, the level at which the Occupational Safety and Health Administration requires companies to protect their workers. But state officials across the South have found old pipes and equipment that emit radiation levels as high as 8 millirems per hour. So again, anything that this stuff touches has the potential of becoming hot as well. And lastly, this is the driving force as to why they got the exemptions. And this water is simply being traded, or this waste fluids are being treated as brine. They say disposing the waste in abandoned wells is safer and less expensive than shipping and storing the waste at a cost of $300 to $500 a barrel at a site in the desert 80 miles west of Salt Lake City. That was back in 1990, okay, 30 years ago. And then, you know, fast forward to 2011, Ian Urbino, before he was shipped out of the newsroom at the New York Times and reassigned down to Washington, D.C., he did this expose again on the fact that the fluids that were coming out of the, the wastewater of these wells is radioactive. And you might say, well, you know, big whoop, is it really important? Well, the thing is, if it's maybe a gallon, if it's maybe a few gallons, you know, there's enough to dilute it to a point where it's not an issue. We're talking, as it was mentioned, 1 trillion gallons a year. And this is right now what is actually driving how much drilling is going on, because the price of gas and oil are so low that it's being determined by that they need to drill wells to get rid of their wastewater. So they're almost as if they're drilling just to make ersatz injection wells. So a quick little primer here. I see Peter is looking in very intently. So radiation basically comes, well, that we're concerned about, it comes in 3 flavors: alpha, beta, and gamma. Alpha particles, and they are particles, they're big, they're made up of 2 protons and 2 neutrons, so basically the nucleus of a helium atom. More importantly, they're low energy and they can be stopped by a piece of paper. But nevertheless, if you were to breathe them in or ingest them, you don't want those, whatever you've ingested, to be bombarding your body from the inside of alpha particles. And that's part of the reason why radon is so dangerous. Beta particles, on the other hand, are they're also particles, but they're either positively charged or negatively charged. And they're a little bit more energetic, and they can basically, they're absorbed by the skin. But once again, you don't want to be ingesting this stuff. The last one, and the most energetic, are the gamma emissions, which is ionizing radiation, and that's the stuff that can cause mutations and cancers and things like that. So even though it'll pass right through you, nevertheless, if it encounters something of significance in your body, like your DNA, it's going to cause problems. The other issue is that a single, radioactive element may generate multiple particles or energy. So you can be an alpha and gamma emitter, or beta and gamma emitter, etc. So like you can see here at this little table here, uranium-238 is primarily an alpha emitter, but lead-214 is both a beta and gamma emitter. Radium is also an alpha and gamma emitter. The other interesting thing is that this thing here, and again, I'm not going to try and get too complicated. This is what we call the decay chain. So that means that, so you're going to start with uranium, that decays to thorium, that decays to radium, that decays to radon, to polonium, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're all radioactive. So get this, if you took fresh produced water from a Marcellus shale well and sealed it up, 2 weeks later, it's going to be 5 times as radioactive, because all the daughter products that are building up are as radioactive or more. So again, it's what they're decaying to and what energies they're releasing. But as I said, within 2 weeks, it's 5 times as radioactive. So just to reiterate, number one, there's 3 types of radiation, and you shouldn't confuse them, because they each have a potential health aspect. But there are folks out there that are saying that your banana has as much radiation as flowback or produced water from a shale gas well. Well, that may be technically correct, but if you look at the type of radiation and the energetics of that and those breakdown products, your banana isn't going to kill you. Okay, you can eat a lot of bananas and not have to worry about the radiation that it's producing. So that's number one. And then, of course, number 2 is, how quickly something decays. And that's where we talk about half-life. And that basically is that, you know, if you have 100 things of uranium, after 4 billion years, you got 50. After another 4 billion years, you got 25. For radon, radon has a half-life of 3.8 days. So again, it all depends on how quickly they decay, what they decay to, what the daughter products are, and things like that. And believe me, the industry loves to play fast and loose with the facts. So anyway, getting back to the produced water. So this is a picture I took of a well pad down in Washington County many, many years ago, back in 2010. But you can see that these things, they're placarded produced water and crude oil. And yet when it goes through the magic tube, it becomes residual waste. And that's where the fun begins, because they're not hazard placarded. They're not placarded for being explosive. They could be, because if you had to placard them for crude oil or produced water, you'd have to put a flammable sign on the truck, but they're not, okay? And of course, they're not labeled radioactive as well. So again, this is when the fun started. Number one, the idea was, well, the solution to pollution is dilution. Let's let them do what the coal industry does with their brine. Let them bring them to publicly owned treatment plants. And in the corner here, that's another thing that I visited in July of 2010. It seems amazing, but it was that long ago. And the guy was over the moon. He was getting 6.5 cents per gallon and was looking forward to getting at least $2 million in new revenue that wasn't going to be, from the customers. It was like, this is great. I can make all these improvements. And of course, it took off. Well, the problem is nobody did the math, because it turned out, unlike coal brine, which is not that salty, this stuff is incredibly salty, and they were allowing them to take up to 1% per day. So if you do the math of basically 1% per volume is 100-fold dilution. Well, there's no way you're going to get in compliance if you're starting at 60,000 to 250,000 milligrams per liter. So what was happening was that these wastewater treatment plants were getting crushed and discharging stuff that hadn't been treated. They were discharging stuff that had high bromide levels, and then that was causing havoc with the drinking water facilities. So here's the other thing. Downstream is your drinking water facility that's using the same river as their source of water, and they're having problems because a disinfectant byproduct of chlorination, when it is in the presence of bromide and residual organics, is trihalomethanes. Again, now we're not talking radioactivity, we're talking about a carcinogen. So that stopped, thankfully. But again, we're still dealing with the fact that even, this is a paper from 2018 done by, I believe that was the Penn State group, that the combination of things like bromide, and the residual radiation was still in the rivers. Because this stuff, the half-life of radium-226 is 1,600 years. So that means that if it's going to take 1,600 years just to get the level in half. So anyway, and a more recent paper showed that right at the point, we still have high levels of bromide and radium. And this is a direct result of us allowing these treatment facilities, both the publicly owned wastewater treatment plants and dedicated brine treatment plants that thankfully most of them have been shut down, we're discharging into the Allegheny and the Monongahela. All right, so this is another technical thing. These are 3 papers that we just published earlier this year, and I'm absolutely thrilled. And why is that important? Is because we have the tools with the chemistry to tell you whether or not something is, and let's see, this is a good one here. These are unconventional brines, including our samples. These are conventional brines. This is mine drainage, and then these are the wonderful water samples that I've been taking for so many years. Bottom line is we can easily tell now through chemical analysis if this stuff has been contaminated by brines from Marcellus shale or from a conventional well and things like that. All right, so we've got the tools and everything. What's going on here? Well, here's the thing. All right, so here's well pads somewhere in Western Pennsylvania, the brine trucks and the drill cuttings. Well, here's the amazing thing. We stopped letting the companies bring their liquid waste directly to the waste treatment plants to dilute and pollute. The DEP, in its infinite wisdom, allows them to bring both solid and liquid waste to landfill, sanitary landfill, things that are not constructed as hazardous waste landfills. Completely different story, okay? These are your typical just lined, okay, sanitary landfills that are supposed to take your garbage, okay? They don't even take electronics, they don't take other stuff, batteries, no, you're not supposed to send that, but we're sending this stuff. And then you might say, well, wait a minute, it's a solid waste landfill. How can you get rid of the liquids? Well, as long as you immobilize them using stuff like kitty litter and wood chips. Okay, I visited landfill in May of 19. They were thrilled. Again, they were getting 6.5 cents a gallon for this stuff, and they were throwing it into a pit, and they were also making wood chips in another part of the landfill. But they were using those wood chips to absorb the waste, and then they were burying it in the landfill. Now, the problem is it's not bound. And so there's this stuff at the bottom that collects every liquid when it rains. There's liquids in anyway. The bottom line is that that stuff percolates like a giant tea bag and winds up collecting at the bottom of the landfill at the liner like it's designed to. And it creates the stuff that we call leachate because the stuff is leaching from the landfill. So this is the Rostraver landfill there. And it was taking these brine trucks and drill cuttings and everything else. They're even using drill cuttings, by the way, as the top. So another thing about landfill law is at the end of the day, to make sure that garbage isn't flying all over the place when it's closed, they have to put a 6-inch layer, ideally of topsoil or some cap, and that they use the drill cuttings for that. So the drill cuttings are on the top of the landfill exposed to the elements. So anyway, at the end of the day, you get this lovely brew. And this is the sample that I have from the Rostraver landfill. It's supposed to be leachate, but you may actually be able to see that there's this rich black organic ooze on the top. And when you open it up, it smells like diesel. Okay, this is not your typical leachate. They were sending it down to the POTW, or the waste treatment plant, in Bell Vernon. And unfortunately, there weren't enough people in Bell Vernon to make enough poop to dilute the 100 to 300,000 gallons a day that of leachate that the landfill was sending to the waste treatment plant. They were taking so much waste that it was destabilizing the landfill itself. It was jello. So they had to get rid of it somehow, and they were sending it down to the POTW. Well, don't you know that they killed the waste treatment plant, and that stuff was going right into the Monongahela River, and who was about 1.5 miles downstream? The Charleroi water facility. So that begged the question, and why did I think that might be happening? Because in 2015, the lovely people of Charleroi got this notification that there were trihalomethanes in their drinking water. And again, putting 2 and 2 together, where do you get the trihalomethanes from? Well, there are some other ways you can do that, but for what we're dealing with in this region now, primarily it's from drilling waste somehow getting in and impacting the source water for these facilities. So anyway, so finally for me, in 2014, I got a phone call from a guy who lived next to the landfill. He said, will you please come out and check this out? And we've been going out there ever since. But the breakthrough came this spring when I got to talk to the manager of the waste treatment plant. He said, I'm fed up. I can't stand it anymore. This is ridiculous. They've killed me and I can't do it anymore. And sure enough, I go to get my sample. They tell me I can't get access to the landfill, even though we had permission to do so. And this is all through the DEP. Okay. But I did get my sample. So here's the thing, the take-home story. Chloride levels, 5,000 almost milligrams per liter. This is not leachate from a landfill. Bromide, 16.7 milligrams per liter. Okay, and more importantly, 120 picocuries of per liter of radium-226 and 250 picocuries of radium-228. It's hot. Okay, you might say, well, it's only a few hundred picocuries per liter, but again, do the math. And they were sending 100,000 to 300,000 gallons per day to, and are they treating for radiation? Are they trading for radium? Okay, so I got my sample finally, and honestly, it was the only time I ever got sick at a waste treatment plant getting samples, because they're pretty good most of the time, but there was some nasty stuff going on there. Specific conductivity, 2,200. Total dissolved solids, 1,400. That's almost 3 times the permitted discharge. This is what they were sending into the Monongahela. Okay, more importantly, 20 picocuries per liter of radium. What's that all about? And the dried sludge, which is going to go back to the landfill to get buried, had over almost more than 1,600 picocuries per kilogram of radium-226 and almost 2,000 picocuries per kilogram of 228. So thankfully, a lot of the radium was coming out in the sludge, but then they were drying the sludge and the sludge was hot. Now, were they required to test for radioactivity of the sludge? What do you think? Good news is once this all broke, and there was an article in the Post-Gazette, we had the Attorney Generals, or the DAs rather, of Rostraver and Fayette, I believe, got involved. A restraining order was put on. The landfill was told they could no longer, because they were, truth be told, the DEP was making that little wastewater treatment plant take this stuff and said, don't worry about the violations and the fines, the landfill will pay for them. Okay, that's criminal, but that's another story. Anyway, there was an injunction. I go back in May, okay, almost a month and a half later, or more than a month and a half later, specific conductivity, total dissolved solids, everything's back in compliance. And guess what? It's not hot anymore. So it was clearly demonstrating that the leachate from just the leachate, okay? So what the hell is going on in the landfill? How hot is that? We have no clue. And then here's the other thing. Remember those other papers that I showed you? Well, the leachate looks just like produced water. So they have now created this incredible disaster in Rostraver. So now the real fun begins, okay? So this is the consent order and agreement with the DEP on how they're going to fix the problem. And what they've decided to do is, because they have all this leachate, and legally now, because they know it's hot, they can't ship it anywhere. What are they going to do with it? Oh, we got to treat it on site. Well, what are we going to do with it? We have to reduce the volume. Well, guess what? There's a treatment system that's used in other landfills. And so they put in a permit for what? An air emissions plant. Okay, so they are proposing, and this is the DEP's idea, to reduce the volume by evaporating it. Do you want to live near this landfill? Okay. So anyway, so this is the deal, and the whole point is when I saw this permit and saw that it was only for the air emissions, basically nitrous oxides and sulfur oxides and volatile organics. Look over here. There's oil and gas. There's radiation, there's residual waste operation. Why aren't those boxes checked off? Because we've actually demonstrated that this stuff in the landfill isn't landfill leachate anymore, but oil and gas waste. So here's how the process works. And they were going to reduce the volume by 95%. Well, that's wonderful. But the fact is they were planning, if they get approval, and it still hasn't been nixed, but thank goodness enough of us wrote complaints during the comment period that they're actually looking into the radiation issue. But 95% volume, 45,000 gallons per day. Now you do the math. Remember that number before, 370 picocuries per liter? We're talking about tens of millions of picocuries in that final volume. And all they have to worry about is NOx, SOx, and VOCs. Then this is the best one, and this just broke last week. Noble Environmental, which is actually the parent company that runs the county hauling, which now owns the Westmoreland Municipal Landfill, has applied for a $1 million grant from the Redevelopment Authority of the County of Westmoreland to put in a CNG fueling station. So they're going to take the natural gas that's now being generated from the landfill and compress that and reduce the volume and put it in their trucks that they've bought to drive all over every neighborhood. And here's the funny story. My municipality, I'm 40 miles away from that landfill. My municipality just signed a 3-year agreement with this company to collect my trash. And I found out that it's really complicated, but to get the contract, the guy basically told them a bunch of fairy tales. So I have all the documentation about how his operations in Ohio are currently under litigation, that he's had 17 violations at the Rostraver landfill alone. He's under investigation by the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, but he runs a ship shop, tight ship landfill, okay? So anyway, so one of the concerns, and I think I probably yacked very quickly, I got through all the questions, through all the material I wanted to do, but the permit is for air emissions only. The leachate is radioactive and should be labeled the residual waste. The leachate, as we said, had a total of 370 picocuries per liter. With that, what they're proposing, a simple calculation would mean that they would be producing a volume of 63 million picocuries per day. So we've actually gone up several, I think we're now talking nanocuries, all right? So no testing or decontamination of the equipment is required, and the process of making CNG may also increase the concentration of radon. So that's the other thing. What's the radioactive material in the landfill primarily? Well, it's radium, but radium is decaying to radon. So the radon levels at the landfill have to be through the roof. And so the only thing there is that, you know, these guys don't have dosimetry or anything like that, and they're working there. And the kicker is that we have at least 15 other landfills across the state that are doing the same thing. So short and sweet. Let the questions begin, and you know, open the forum for questions.
The first question, why are bananas radioactive? I'm very curious.
So bananas have potassium-40, which is a radioactive form of potassium. But the good news is that, and Peter asked me earlier, and damn, I forgot what the half-life is. But anyway, but potassium is kind of interesting, potassium-40, because it decays either to calcium-40 or argon-40. Argon is a harmless gas, but calcium we can use for our bones, and both of those are non-radioactive. The problem with radium or uranium is the fact that they decay to a suite of other radioactive elements. So at the end of the day, even though you might have as many picocuries of potassium-40, it's not going to do anything near what the same amount of radium is going to do.
I put my hand up on the display to ask a question or make a comment. I went through the formal procedures and put my hand up on the symbology. There's sort of a mitt-like glove next to Peter Deutsch.
Yeah, I don't know if it's showing, Peter. Go ahead and ask your
Yeah, well, what's the question,
I was
Pete?
just going to comment on a couple of things. As far as the potassium goes, that half-life, I think it's on the order of 1 or 2 billion years. 1.9 times 10 to the 90 years is what I think I read. In contrast, say, with the radiums, which are 1,600 years,
Yeah.
or roughly, I guess that's 1 million times smaller. In fact, they're 1 million times quicker, not to speak of the radon.
Right. Yeah.
So
So I mean, and this is where these guys are being disingenuous because it's comparing apples and oranges, but they're using bananas.
And the other thing is that the alpha may not go very far, but its typical emission speed is still a paltry 10,000 miles a second.
Yeah. So it
May not get very far, but it still has it packs a pretty big punch.
well, that's why you don't want to ingest anything that's an alpha emitter or breathe it. And that's the danger of radon.
Oh, sorry, Peter.
I'm done, I think,
Okay.
with that. I mean,
Well, thank you.
I think there were some things I got lost a little bit in some of the discussion, but I'll see if I have in some of the details, but I'll see if I have more questions.
Okay.
We had a question. Can citizens find out if landfills are leaking? We have 2 in Butler County that are reputed to accept drilling waste.
Well, again, they're supposed to have manifests. If they're taking drilling waste, they're supposed to have gamma detectors that the truck will pull up and they'll monitor. But you know, again, I've seen those facilities, and so the limit on a roll off, your typical, you know, I showed a picture of a roll off in that first slide, is 140 millirem. Now here's another problem. You can't convert millirem to picocuries really easily because millirem is actually a human exposure value. And of course it goes back to, you know, when we talk about exposure, what is the source of radiation? Is it an X-ray? Is it a cosmic ray? Is it, you know, an alpha, a beta, or a gamma? It's going to vary. So you really can't do that. But that's how they get away with that. They just pull up the truck, and as long as the alarms don't go off, they can accept the load. Now, with that said, there has to be a manifest, and that manifest is sent to, a copy of that is sent to the DEP. So you probably, I don't know if Butler is Meadville, but you'd have to do a file review of the landfill. And if anybody knows, I mean, this is my new mission. So I've got the equipment. I'm more than willing to do that. If you have an idea that a landfill might be impacting local streams, I'm more than willing to go and sample. And if I can get, you know, if they're nice enough, if they're transparent enough to give me a sample of leachate, even better. Because they should know. You know, because a lot of times they're saying, well, wait a minute, the load wasn't radioactive. What are you telling me that my leachate's radioactive? They have no clue.
Diane, were you raising your hand? I didn't know if you were in. No problem. There was a question from Barbara. What do you recommend to be done with this brine? Obviously, there should be no more fracking anywhere.
Well, but the thing is, the brine has to be treated as toxic waste. And unfortunately, and I know this, I mean, I use the example of the nuclear energy. The reason why, you know, people think, oh, it was Chernobyl, it was the China Syndrome movie that, you know, didn't win an Academy Award, but it was very popular. No, it was the fact that we couldn't build any more nuclear power plants because we don't have a repository for the waste. So this is something that is intrinsic in this industry, especially the oil and gas industry. They've gotten away with it for years. Okay. So if it were treated, as you saw from that article back in 1990, instead of 6.5 cents a gallon, okay, it's you know, $4, $5, $6, okay, and that's going to break their back, and they can't do it. It's not, you know, possible. It's just not economic, and that's where we should have been from day one. No one's ever made money on a gas well. You know, that's a fracked gas well. The company might have, and some executives might have, but it's only because it's this huge Ponzi scheme. So that's the real key. So what should we do with the brine? It needs to be treated as toxic waste and handled appropriately.
Is some of this gas, this natural gas that I think was being taken to run the trucks? This is what I was trying to remember. If I see a trash truck or a recycling truck coming by that says that it runs with methane, could that methane be coming from some leachate source? And if so, would it contain significant amounts of radon?
Well, here's the thing, and it's an excellent point, and that's what got me started again with finding out that my own house has a problem, and I fixed it. But anyway, so remember, radon has a half-life of 3.8 days.
Right.
So the industry has always said, well, we know the gas is hot. Now, this is from a shale gas well. We know the gas is hot, but because of storage and transport, by the time it gets to your furnace or your hot water heater or your stove, it's lost most of its punch. But the thing is that if these guys are taking the stuff fresh from the ground, compressing it right there, and that timeline, the gas may not have enough time to actually decay.
Well, what about sitting inside the engines or the motors of the trash truck? Couldn't it make those radioactive?
Over time, yeah, because then you've got it, because that's the other thing. The radon eventually decays to lead-214, or no, lead-210, which is also hot. So again, it's these different daughter products that.
So there's still some radioactive daughters.
Yeah.
Bob, you have a question? I'm just reminding you that you're muted.
Bob, you're muted.
I have a question. John, thank you very much. I wanted to tune in today. I'm out of Butler County, but I'm in Pittsburgh now because I wanted to hear what you're up to, always knowing that you are doing interesting work. I haven't lost interest in this topic at all. In fact, it's really concerning to me to hear, you know, about the landfills, and you know, this continues to be unregulated in a way that isn't going to harm people. But what I have trouble doing is translating this to talking about it to common people. Yeah. Like, you know, trying to make them understand, because you're in Pittsburgh doesn't mean you're not being affected by this. You know, that you're not down the line, you're not down the line and actually having impact. Have you had any success in trying to translate this to people in a way that the common person can understand it, that's not scientific?
Right. Well, the thing is, and again, right now, I'm trying to figure out a way to hopefully finally get municipal water to the woodlands.
Yeah.
You have to translate it into dollars and cents, and how, even though there's a fracking ban in Pittsburgh, there's a fracking ban in New York, the fact that these landfills all up and down again, it's getting into the waste treatment plants again, up and down the rivers, is winding up in Pittsburgh and New York. I mean, I have a grant to go up and work in Chemung County because that landfill has been taking all this waste for years. So, you know, we're going to demonstrate whether or not, or at least see if they're affected. But the point is that, and as I said, from day one, this whole trihalomethane story is affecting your water rates. You know, if you have municipal water, you know, has your company switched from chlorination to chloramination because of the high levels of bromide that still persist in the source water? Okay, I've got a list, and you know, the last one I knew of was Brackenridge. And the concern there is that if you don't have the correct amount of corrosion inhibitor in that chloraminated water, it's going to leach lead and copper. And with these older buildings, it's a problem. So that's where you hate to be, you know, like the Cassandra of like, oh my God, we're going to hell in a handbag. But the reality is this stuff is, I mean, poor Charleroi. And the good news was that a month later, or even a couple weeks later, Charleroi contacted the guy at the POTW to tell them that the water had changed. And they were actually having to use a chemical they hadn't used in years because it had returned to its previous state. So the point is that the water got better once they shut off the spigot at the POTW. And so Charleroi was being affected by this. The people at the plant were being affected by this. And so that's where you've got to figure out where is it going to go. And getting back to the woodlands, you know, how is it if you have 200 households that don't have potable water, you're going to have a tax base? You know, it behooves the municipality to make that investment so that the house values, the land values are maintained. I mean, this is the insanity. And I tell you what, I mean, this was the other crazy thing. At the Upper Borough zoning hearing, somebody actually got up and said, I hear that if you have shale gas on your property, you know, it increases your value. Well, guess what? Look into it. You can't get, if you have a gas well, you can't get a loan. Your property values have gone down because you have a risk. You can't get insurance. You can't get mine subsidence insurance because you have an existing risk on your property. Those are the types of arguments that you have to go. Look, it's going to hit you in your pocket unless you have, and then this whole business, and I hate to bring up politics, but that shale gas commercial, 600,000 jobs? Where the hell did that number come from?
Right.
It's pure fiction. So anyway, that's where you make the argument and you don't get excited like I just did.
Go ahead, Bob.
Hey, John, maybe you can help me with this one. Moon Township Municipal Sewer Authority services my town. And I'm on council and I helped appoint a member to that board. And I asked a direct question, are you taking any waste from the fracking? And the answer was no. Now I find out from Melissa Troutman that the Imperial dump is taking frack waste and Moon Township Sewer Authority is taking the leachate from that dump. And my concern is when they treat sewage, municipal waste, they have a big pool, like a big swimming pool, and they have these little bugs in there that eat everything up. Then they discharge it into the river, the Ohio River, a drinking water source.
Right.
And they have to take samples every so often. They cook them and weigh those to see if they have enough bugs in there. Now, how does salt from the brine and the radioactivity affect those little bugs? I heard that up the Monongahela River that they crashed their plant with that type of situation by taking in the frack waste and trying to treat it. I can't see how you could take salt or brine out of drinking water unless you use evaporation. And I really don't know of any technique where you could take radioactivity and neutralize it, because they would use that at every nuclear plant.
Right.
So, we have these questions out there. How are they getting away with this? And they have to report to the EPA when they put it into a navigable river like the Ohio River. How are they getting away with this? I just don't get it.
All right. So yeah, so you have your NIPD's permit where you're allowed to discharge a certain amount. It all comes down to dilution. And this is what they like to say, and again, there's two terms, two terms that I wish would go away, but won't. The solution to pollution is dilution. And then the second one, it's a more technical term, assimilable capacity. Basically, what assimilable capacity is, it's an engineering term, how much crap you can put into a body of water before it impacts and diminishes the quality of that water. And so that's why one of the things that everybody, the DEP focuses on are low flow. So like right now, we haven't had rain in quite some time. Our rivers are probably under low flow. Now you're going to see high bromide. Now you're going to see a bunch of contaminants that you hadn't seen before, not because they weren't there, but they were so dilute that they were non-detectable. Okay, so this has been the magic. The problem with what happened in Bell Vernon was they were just overwhelmed. That landfill should have never been sending 100 to 300,000 gallons. But the thing was, it became a tea bag for fracking waste. So, and here's the shocker. I don't know if I mentioned this. 80% volume per day. So a landfill in Pennsylvania can take up to 80% of their daily volume of waste with fracking waste, including liquids that have been immobilized. So now 80% technically, it's usually probably 40 to 50. But that's why I was saying, hell, there's no way that with all that fracking waste, it's not going to affect the composition of the leachate. But technically, because it's coming off the landfill, it is defined as leachate. And the governor in October 2015, signed into law a bill that helped facilitate trucking, piping, and moving leachate from landfill to POTWs. So this is the point. By definition, these guys are in compliance. But the problem is if they screw up their numbers, then things get out of whack, which is what happened in Bell Vernon. Now, there was an interview with the guy in Altoona, and he said, we have enough shit to dilute any amount of fracking waste. So he's perfectly happy. The guy up in Clinton, the Wayne landfill, was ecstatic because, again, he's getting all this money. And then you don't know the twist there. Where the wood chips coming from? Well, they're making wood chips from a wood chipper facility that they built to handle all the logs that are coming from the deforestation for pipelines. He actually said that, the wood's coming from pipeline construction. So again, this is how they're trying to make it work. And the thing is that these landfills were never designed to handle this material. The waste treatment plants were never designed to handle this material. And as far as the radium is concerned, yeah, they can take it out. If they treat it as brine from oil and gas, the first step is to get rid of the scale, which is the barium and the strontium, and that will remove the lion's share, not all, but the lion's share of the radium. But now you have radioactive sludge or scale, and that's usually dried and sent off to landfill. So again, this is, to them, it doesn't matter. Once it's in the ground, it's not a problem. But the thing is that they've, like everything else with the injection wells, they overpressurize, the landfills, they overfill. It's just total mismanagement. So it's perfectly legal until they screw up.
Peter, did you have a question? You're muted. You're muted.
I don't think so. I thought I removed that from the,
Oh, you may have. Let's see. We have, is there concern for people living downriver from the now closed brine treatment plant swimming in the Allegheny?
that's not my question.
Well, the thing is, you know, again, I would
I
say
don't disown it. I just,
our primary concern right now is the, you know, I would say is the well, yeah, again, untreated sewage because of stormwater mismanagement. That's the real danger. But the issue really is, I mean, I'm not going to say that there's not a lot of radioactivity. It's just that it is still above background. So that's a concern. And we have no idea how long it's going to last.
Barbara said drilling waste transport by barge to some type of treatment on the Ohio River Deep Rock is being argued and planned right now.
No, if you follow this with the build out of the petrochemical plant, I did get some encouraging news, although it's really, you know, you take some of these things with, you know, the silver lining or whatever. But I recently was told by someone with knowledge of the industry that Washington County will be drilled out by 2028. Because the problem is they went for the sweet spot and the new wells that are going in are not producing anywhere near they need to. So basically, you know, and again, it becomes a water issue. And it's not that we don't have enough of the source water for them to frack. It's that we just have no place to put all the produced water that's being produced. But, you know, they're having second thoughts about the cracker plant for Belmont, Ohio, because they're realizing, Shell realizes that they may not have enough gas. And so now the next thing is going to be this storage facility down in Moundsville, so that the Shell plant has a consistent source of ethane. Because we've made all these commitments for export, and now we've made a commitment. So that's the other thing, 4.4 million gallons of ethane a day for that one cracker plant. That's about 1,000 wells. So, you know, it just, I have no idea where this is going to go. And again, not to be political, but, you know, November is going to be a, you know, change, but we just can't do this anymore.
Does anybody else have a question? Yes, Bob. Reminding you you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Living here in Beaver County, we hear a lot of rumors about the Shell cracker plant. And we heard about the 4 cracker plants that was going to be built on the Ohio River. It seemed like the other 3 are backing off. Some of the investors, like South Korea, pulled completely out. Those nurdles that they're going to make used to get $1 a pound. Now they're getting 40 cents a pound. So the economics here is taking a grip on what's really going to happen down here. There was also something I saw on the internet from England, the frackers, the anti-frackers over there was talking about Shell was looking for a buyer for this Beaver County plant already. So, you know, when you start to hear these kind of rumors going around, you know, they're looking at the bottom line. Can they make any money? You know, they expected to get $1 a pound. Now it's down to 40 cents. And I like what you brought up about the number of wells. The pipelines are not in. You have a lot of wells, but you can make a product, but if you can't get it to market, it's worthless just sitting there. There's no royalties coming in. So that sort of sours the people that lease their lands too. Ones that are making money on it, that are hooked up, they're happy, they're making money, but the multitude of people who are not actually hooked up to a line somewhere, they're not making anything. The Sunoco pipeline that blew up in Center Township, that really put the kibosh to a lot of stuff, especially from Butler all the way down to Washington County. All those tap-ins haven't happened. Yeah. And it's an interesting thing to follow. And the fines that are coming in because of the amount of wetlands and streams that they totally destroyed along the way with that pipeline is another subject altogether.
Well, that was just a comment on that with the pipelines. That, you know, everybody's doing directional drilling now. It is the thing to do. And the remarkable thing about, you know, on the fact sheet for the Shell cracker plant and the Falcon, specifically the Falcon pipeline, is it specifically says that directional drilling will be used in sensitive areas. And that's the worst possible thing, because they just had in Chester County. And again, Diane, to your question, you know, there's no drilling in Chester County outside of Philadelphia, but there's sure as hell directional drilling to make a pipeline. And they just had another screw up where they contaminated and a whole bunch of drilling mud was spilt everywhere. And again, it's not just drilling mud, it's the chemicals and the surfactants to make it work. And again, it's the same stuff that they're using for the fracking because, you know, it's cheap and it's available. So, you know, they keep saying, oh, we're not using the same stuff, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, that's what's happening. And they're, you know, again, as I said, the directional drilling is bad news because, again, you're using fluids and it's causing sinkholes. Yeah, Bob.
Yeah. Can we talk about pigging, the cleaning of the inside of the pipe and getting the radioactivity out of there? And they also have holding tanks to where they have companies come in and scrape that black tar off the inside. And a lot of those guys are not properly outfitted or educated, and they're exposing themselves to a lot of radioactivity because it builds up on the inside of the pipes.
Right.
That's another radioactive issue. And where does that all go? Does that get, when they pig, did they just dump that out into somebody's farm property, or do they take it away as residual waste?
Well, again, I mean, I think there are regulations, and just to give you another example, so I guess it's now 3 weeks ago, I was at this nice little farm outside of Youngstown. It's not really it's not a functioning farm, but there's alpacas and animals. It's an adult daycare for adults with you know, problems, and they permitted an injection well right next door. So the injection well abuts the alpaca barn. And so the following week, after I met all these people that were concerned, we got some water samples, et cetera, et cetera. Well, anyway, 2 trucks from from Pennsylvania show up, and they're having trouble with the injection well, so they're not taking it. So what did they do? They told them to take their hose and flip it over the impoundment and just spray it on the field. So they got pictures. Okay, and I basically had to educate the owner of the, you know, of the daycare to tell him, you have to document this stuff. You have to take pictures because they're not going to believe you. And, you know, yeah, they should be, if this is all waste, that should be taken to some place. But again, they're going to say, well, pull up the truck to the gamma detector and, you know, unload it. I mean, you've got Yukon, you've got, well, it's Max Environmental, you've got all these other places. And again, if they're going to pay cash in the dollar, and the DEP gets their cut of the tipping fee. So they're not going to stop this. So again, we have to keep asking these questions because, you know, I asked point blank to Dave Spiegelmeyer at the EPA hearing, I guess it was 2 years ago. I said, what is your organization, what is the industry doing to protect their workers from the radiation? And he said, you know, I mean, I asked 2 questions and he just completely ignored the radiation issue. Plus he denied that they were trying to get road brining back. So, you know, I mean, they just, it's one lie after another. So we just have to be vigilant. So where's the pigging? Oh, actually, is there one next to the Toma?
I'm not sure where the pigging goes on in every pipeline.
Yeah.
Because of the radiation buildup inside there. And I was curious as to when it comes out, where does it go? Is it taken to a dump or is it just left in the farmer's field?
I have no idea.
That is a good thing to follow up on because who knows what goes on out in the woods.
Best case scenario, it goes to landfill.
Yeah, John, there is a little rectangular pad next to the one that's next to Toma's that has a pigging station on it.
I thought so. Yeah, I mean that was, and I'm shocked because, you know, we frequent Toma's a lot, but my wife sometimes gets her parts for research. So when she goes, I tell her to pick me up a tenderloin. Yeah, I mean, this is something
I just
worry
want to interject because
What's that?
I was just going to interject that we're talking about Toma, but one of the reasons we're talking about Toma is because it's next to the Knoch High School,
Yes.
middle school, elementary, the campus. So we wanted to make sure the people that are on here recognize that that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, John, I had one other thing. A few years back, Youngstown, Ohio had 97 earthquakes in 1 year, and their governor shut down the deep well dumping. And the contractor kept taking the trucks, and he wasn't allowed to deep well dump in Ohio. So he had his men at nighttime empty those water trucks into the storm drains, which went into the Mahoning River, which flowed into the Beaver River. And Beaver Falls Water Authority gets their water out of there. And it crashed the plant 3 different times. And one of the things that they were trying to mix was chlorine, and they come up with this chloramine that they were sending out for people to drink.
Yeah.
And they did catch the one kid that worked for him got fired, so he turned them in, and the contractor was prosecuted, and he went to prison. I don't know for how long, but I guess they're back deep well dumping again because now we're getting earthquakes in Lawrence and Mercer counties coming across the border from Youngstown and Boardman. So
We just got, again, that was part of this trip where I'm involved with with a group out of Youngstown State and Ohio Northern University and Wayne State of all places in Detroit. But we went and we sampled a bunch of places, but Patriot is, I mean, I thought they shut that guy down. No, he's got injection wells. He's got all sorts of stuff going on in several different places. So we hit about just under a dozen places and got samples. So I should know a little better in a couple weeks, because that just happened. But oh yeah, no, I mean it's and again, this is not going away. We have to figure out how we can responsibly get rid of this stuff, because this again is one of the ugliness of this industry that nobody really wants to talk about, is that these wells, even though they're not producing gas or oil, are still producing produced water. And until they're capped or plugged, they're going to continue. And there's no guarantee I don't know what can happen if you plug a well and it starts building up pressure. Have no clue. Okay, are we going to have, I'm calling it already, PW, produced water, like we have AMD. Is PW going to start popping up out of places all over the place like mine drainage has? Have no clue. Hopefully it will not be an issue, but until they cap these wells, they're going to continue to produce this nasty brine, and it's got to be treated appropriately. And they're looking, and they will continue to look for ways to basically, because it is affecting their bottom line. And as I said, I got it from this one source. He's decided to come clean, basically, but he just said, look, if you can't get rid of it, it becomes it affects the bottom line. They can't afford to get rid of this water and this waste. So we have to be vigilant, because they want road brining. They want to be able to bring it to POTWs. They want to be able to just dump it into the rivers, because it's just salt water. But hopefully I've presented enough information tonight that you realize it's not salt water. In fact, I didn't put anything about aqua salina, but the main ingredient that's listed on that is ancient seawater. It's oil and gas waste, and it contains all the constituents, including chromium, arsenic, selenium, lots of iron, lots of manganese, and radium-226 and 228.
Wow.
And yet they're letting him use it on roads. And again, he goes up to Columbus and parades around their halls of Congress with a banana, saying that my product is just as safe as this banana.
So we are at 16 past. Are there any other questions before we wrap up?
How can we get a link to this presentation to send to our friends in Ohio?
It's going to be posted on our MOB YouTube page, and I believe we're going to have it posted on our Facebook page as well.
And if anybody, it's just stolz@duq.edu if you want to send me an email. And as I said, if you have a source of leachate for me to analyze and want to, I'm more than happy to do so.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Yeah, it was really good.
Hey, John, I'm going to be in touch about that. We have a landfill up here in northern Butler County that has a stream running very close to it. I would love to have it looked at.
Again, these guys, as I said, I'll cut them the benefit of the doubt initially, because they've been told it's perfectly safe by the DEP. So this is where this stuff, and the guy who owns the he's in a world of hurt. He basically bought himself, because they had been taking waste there at least from 2010. And he bought it in 2018, I think. So he's gotten all the liability. But it's a disaster, and it never should have happened. But the DEP let it happen. So. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome.
I hope our trash trucks, our recycle trucks aren't radioactive. At
Well-
least not very. I wonder if there can be something like a pigging operation needed for those recycle trucks
Yeah.
at some stage. But I guess I better go and do a bunch of other stuff right now.
Good night, Peter.
Good night. Good night, John.
All right. I'll see you guys soon. And Mike, yeah, let's.
Excellent as usual, John.
What's that?
Thanks a lot.
Okay, bye.
Excellent.
I said excellent as usual.
Thank you.
And thank you, Leslie.
Yeah, nice meeting you, Leslie.
Nice to meet you, John.
And everybody else, stay safe.
And good
Our
night.
fans,
Diane.